Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome back to another Sunday morning mobility yoga class. Today will be a little bit more advanced mobility. I'll be taking you through essentially my personal lower body mobility flow. So please make sure you know your own limitations. I've mentioned in previous classes about knowing the difference between discomfort in a pose and pain in a pose. So really important for this class that you listen to your own body, and if you have pain, please modify or kind of ease your way out of a pose a little bit. And then don't ever try to push through any pain. The object of this flow is to not push yourself into a place of pain. A little bit of discomfort is okay to sit with. That edge between pain and discomfort can be where your flexibility will increase, but it's really up to you to know what your limitations are. Helpful today to have a block or a small pillow and a strap. And we'll be starting today sitting down, just to get ourselves grounded for a little bit, and then we'll kind of move right away into some exercises to get blood flowing in the legs first. So get comfortable in your seat, use blocks or pillows as you need to prop yourself upright. And sitting with your eyes closed. Breathe deep through the nose. Acknowledge all the points of contact you have between your feet, your shins, your knees, your ankles, your sit bones, and the mat. Pressing down so you can grow nice and tall in your seat. Gently tone the belly, drawing the belly in. We're sitting upright, no slouching shoulders. Be sure to relax the side of the neck and top of the shoulders here. The trapezius muscles, relax these. Feel your shoulders just resting down, nice and relaxed. Gently tuck your chin in so we're not chicken necking, sticking our chin and head way forward. And just find a comfortable way to rest your hands in your lap. You might like to place the palms face up. Generally, this will signify you're open for receiving information. And I'll share another reading with you this morning from Pema Chodron. Again, she is a Buddhist nun. And this again is from her book, Comfortable with Uncertainty. The reading today is titled The Practice of Mindfulness and Refraining. So I'll read this to you, and it might resonate with something that's currently happening in your life, or you might recognize certain phrases might really ring a bell with you. And just sit with whatever emotions come up. Maybe some images in your mind or memories. Just sit with it, just notice them. So Pema says, refraining is very much the method of becoming a dharmic person. It's the quality of not grabbing for entertainment the minute we feel a slight edge of boredom coming on. It's the practice of not immediately filling up space just because there's a gap. An interesting practice that combines mindfulness and refraining is just to notice your physical movements when you feel uncomfortable. When we feel we're losing ground, we make all kinds of little jumpy, jittery movements. You might notice that when you feel uncomfortable, you do things like pull your ear, scratch something even though it doesn't itch, or straighten your collar. When you notice what you do, don't try to change it. Don't criticize yourself for whatever it is you're doing. Just notice what it is. I don't know about you, but I feel personally attacked. I acknowledge myself as a jittery person. So the work for me comes now in acknowledging and noticing when I'm jittering and why I'm adjusting or fidgeting. Not trying to change it necessarily, but just noticing it. And maybe you can do the same during this practice or through the rest of your day, especially in our home quarantine situation right now. We have lots of time to be bored and lots of time to reach for distractions. So now's the perfect time to practice just noticing what we're doing when we feel we need to be distracted and why we might be uncomfortable sitting in stillness or in silence. Perfect theme for this class, where we might be spending a little bit more time than usual on some of these poses to address our flexibility. Come here, Harry. Come here. Harry's uncomfortable. He wants to leave. Okay, so we're gonna move right away into a standing position. So you can open your eyes, be aware of your surroundings again, move your blocks or props, pillows, whatever you need to out of the way. I'll have you stand at the top of the mat, but I'll just demonstrate here. We'll have feet together, so heel toe your feet in, so ideally your toes and your heels are touching. If they can't quite touch, then you can separate them just a little bit, but you definitely want the feet facing the same direction so they're parallel to one another. Feel soft in your knees right now, so you're not hyperextending and locking those knees back. You can even give yourself a couple little bounces here to see if you're actually springy. Especially with hypermobile joints, we never want to straighten all the way to where we feel the joint lock. Even a micro, tiny bend is good. Tone the belly, so drawing the belly inward and upward slightly, so we also activate Mula Bandha, that pelvic floor lift. And look down at your feet. Lift all of your toes up at the same time and spread the toes out as far as you can, as wide as you can. And then one at a time, starting with the pinky toe, lower them down, ending with the big toes on the inside. See if you can do it actually in that order, one toe at a time. Pick them up again, spread them out, and lower them down, starting pinky toe, ring finger toe, if that's a thing, pointer toe, and the big toe. So now looking down at your feet, ideally their toes will be a little bit more spread apart now. We still have our soft knees. Bend them a little bit more, be a little bit more exaggerated here, and move with your breath. On an inhale, sweep both arms up overhead, lift the gaze up, and the exhale, fold at the waist, bend the knees a lot, and start to lower the upper body and the arms down, sweeping towards the mat. Now you might have really tight hamstrings, so a block is nice here. If you want to be able to rest your hands down on something, you can let your head hang down, but bend the knees quite a bit so we feel more release in our lower back as opposed to the hamstrings. So already here you can play around with this concept. Straightening the legs, you take the lower back out of the equation and focus the stretch onto the back of the legs, the hamstrings here. So just be really gentle with yourself to start out. Bend the knees quite a bit and just let yourself hang. Now we'll do a couple of these full body moves here to really get the blood flowing. So you can go at your own pace. I just encourage you to link the movement with your breath and be really mindful on your way up how much you're pressing into your feet. You want to be actively grabbing the mat with your feet and your toes. So the arches of your feet feel a little bit lifted. You feel the back of your legs be engaged here. Something that helps me as well is use this mind-muscle connection to lift your kneecaps into your hip socket. And what that does is activate your quads. So if we're just folded really passively, these big stabilizing muscles here are not really engaged and not helping us. And that's when we can actually tweak our lower back. So actively pressing down through the feet, gripping the mat, our toes are nice and spread out here. Squeeze your glutes and imagine lifting the kneecaps into the hip socket. Suddenly your quads activate. On your inhale, big lifting up, arms overhead, and then the exhale, folding at the waist, sweeping the hands down to the mat or to the block, let your head hang down. Couple breaths here if it feels okay. Or to generate a little bit more heat, you can make this movement one transition per breath. So inhaling, lift up, lift that gaze, arms overhead, exhale, fold, and sweep the hands down. Let the head hang, keep it bending your knees, and then right away again when you inhale, lifting up, and exhale, fold. one more flow like this with your breath, and then we'll meet after the exhale in a forward fold. Now, similar here to when you take your first downward facing dog of the day, you like to pedal your feet back and forth. So you can do that, bending one knee, straightening the other. I also kind of let my hips rock. One hip goes up, so my left knee is bent, my right hip comes up, and then the opposite, my right knee bends, the right hip dips down. So we're just rocking the hips, bending the knees, straightening the other. Now I'm going to keep my block here. This is a nice modification. So if you have a block that you haven't been using, you can grab it now. And we're going to take a similar sort of breath flow, except we're only going to lift up halfway on our inhale. So forward folding here, Uttanasana. Still keep a bend in the knees. Exhale, let your upper body hang, your head hangs down. Inhale, fingertips on the block, lift up halfway. Ardha Uttanasana. What we want is a flat back. Another option, if you don't have a block, is your fingertips to your shin, maybe even your hands resting on your thighs. Please do not rest your hand on your knees, because that'll encourage that locking of the knees. So it could be fingertips to the shin, fingertips to the block. You can also take your block up to a different level here. So now the sequence is inhaling, lifting halfway, nice and flat back. Think long from the crown of your head to your tailbone. So actively sending your hips back. Shoulders are relaxed here. And the exhale, folding again. Intense forward fold, Uttanasana. Inhaling, lift up halfway. And exhaling, fold. Now again here, you can take it at your own pace. If it serves you more to just hang out here and fold, please do that. Do whatever feels good. I'm going to pedal my feet back and forth here in Ardha Uttanasana. A lot of the times when I'm doing pedaling my feet here and rocking my hips back and forth in these lower body mobility poses, I'm exploring different parts of my hamstrings that might be tight. If we keep our pelvis neutral the whole time, it's really safe for the lower back, but we only get to experience like a very, very small portion of the hamstrings, like a direct line right down here. So by rocking the hip side to side, you kind of get more of the side of the hamstring stretching out a little bit. I hope that made sense. It's hard to explain. So a couple more times, exhaling and fold. Inhaling, lift up halfway. Now we'll take this a little bit more, or a little bit further. So you can come back to a neutral standing position. This will be the most involved. We're gonna take ourselves all the way down to kind of like a squat, curling up in a ball, human egg sort of thing. So we'll bend the knees a lot, take the forearms, wrap them around the shins, tuck the head down, and inhale, big move. We're coming all the way up. And I'm taking my arms sort of up in a Y and lifting the chest and the heart. Exhaling, come down, wrap the hands the opposite way. Really make a tight squeeze here. Drop that head down and inhale, big, press into the feet, lifting all the way, gazing up at the end. A couple times through. Okay, now still standing here at the top of the mat. Shift your weight onto the left leg, pick up the right. We'll just use hip flexor strength for now to pick this leg up and hold it here. Draw the belly in. You can check your core engagement here by kind of poking your belly. Keep the right foot flexed. And now interlace the fingers around that right shin, draw it into your chest, and roll the ankle around. So we're challenging the balance of that left foot, the standing foot. Embrace the wiggles and wobbles that you feel in that foot. We don't balance by standing exactly still and straight. We balance by making all these little minute micro movements and still finding stability despite those little movements. Okay, now keep the grip on the shin for now. Start to tip forward from the waist, bringing that upper body down. Release the grip of the hands. Take them either to the mat or to your block. Keep this right hip rolled down and send the right leg straight back. So just a supported warrior 3, Virabhadrasana 3. Now, in keeping with the theme of moving with the breath, exhale and think length out of your heel. Inhale, think length, and exhale, draw that right knee into the chest, tuck your head down slightly. Inhale, take it out. Whoa. Exhale, bring it in. Maybe challenge yourself to try to get your right knee all the way to your nose. And inhale, take it out. Be careful to not roll the hip open right now. So keep that right hip pinned down. What you might start to feel is actually the standing leg working a lot harder, helping to stabilize you. Okay, now the right leg straight behind. Move the block out in front of you just a tiny, tiny bit, and now roll that right hip open. So we're prepping for Ardha Chandrasana, half moon pose. If you want, hey, you can lift this right arm overhead as well, opening the chest, opening the right hip, or you can keep both of your hands on your block down here and just experiment with the difference between your right hip closed down and then the right hip open. Some of us that have our arm lifted will be here. If you have that right arm lifted, just keep that hip open. No need to roll it closed and back open again. Okay, now let's all roll that hip down. Lower our right hand down. Just forward fold for a second. Big bend in the knees. Again, this is kind of our hamstring friendly resting pose. You get to decide and experiment with how much you want to stretch your hamstrings by straightening the knees a little bit more. I still don't really feel super warmed up, so I'm taking care to keep my knees bent a lot. My belly is actually resting on my thighs here. I'm gonna acknowledge right now that all I want to do is move this cat hair off my yoga mat. I'm not gonna do it, but I'm gonna acknowledge that that's what I want to do. I want to distract myself right now. Okay, now let's come back up to standing. Shift our weight to the right leg. Now, even though we're really heavy and solid on this right leg here, don't lock that knee. Keep micro bend in it. Lift the left, drawing the belly in and up. Again, Mula Bandha is the lifting and engagement of the pelvic floor. So all of these stabilizing muscles in your pelvis can be activated right now. Left knee is bent, the foot is flexed. Challenge yourself, draw your belly in a little bit more, and then take those fingers, interlace around the shin. Try to interlace your fingers opposite way, and then draw that shin and knee into your chest, rolling left ankle. A couple times, both directions. Okay, hinging forward at the waist. Slow and controlled as you can. Keep that shin hugged in. Send your upper body forward, then release the hands to your block. You can also place the fingers on the mat. You don't have to use the block. Send the left leg out straight behind you. Left hip rolled down. Think long and strong out of your heel. Even here, we can work to increase our active range of motion for the hamstring. So all of the muscles on the back side of the leg right now are working to keep it lifted. And that's the best and safest way to work on flexibility, is when that muscle is engaged. So inhaling length out of the left heel. Exhale, draw that knee towards your nose. 4 more times. Okay, now take it back. And here is where we experiment with opening that left hip. If you feel comfortable, whoa, with right leg balance and stability, rolling the left hip open and also the left arm and shoulder. Again, maybe to our half moon pose here. But some of us will find it a little bit more beneficial to keep both hands on the block and play around with that transition of closing and opening the hips. Okay, now close the left hip down, lower the left hand if you haven't yet, and place the left foot down. And just a forward fold again. I caught myself moving the cat hair away, fidgeting, just observing the fact that I was indeed fidgeting. All right, now coming up to our standing position again, and still trying to move mindfully, so pressing into the feet, activate those glutes, squeeze the bum slightly, activating the quads, belly lifted, come on up. And we'll turn to take a wide step on our mat here, preparing for a wide-legged forward fold. So the feet will be parallel to the short edge of the mat, toes pointing not forward anymore, whatever direction this is. Before we settle down into our forward fold, we'll take it side to side a couple times in a modification of Skandasana, a side lunge. Now, if you're comfortable with this and you do this in your practice often, you're welcome to take this all the way down, and I'll show you all of the different levels to which you can take this. So we'll have our hands together at our heart at Anjali Mudra. Soft the knees again, draw the belly in, and we'll take our hips over to the left side, bending the left knee, straightening this right leg. So we're releasing, relaxing the adductor, the inside of the thigh, strengthening the outside of the thigh with the bent knee. Important to keep the heel down here. Now this might be the edge of your flexibility today or your mobility, and that's perfect, amazing. To deepen the stretch over here, what you can do is roll those toes up, sink your hips back, and then feel a little bit more stretch in the adductor here. We'll take it up to the other side. So the toes come back down and switching over here. Keep the kneecap of the bent knee pointed the same direction as the toes. What we want to avoid is that knee caving in, okay? So better to keep that knee pointing out slightly. Now again here, maybe lifting the toes of the straight leg, sinking down into that adductor. And we'll just take it back and forth a few times. So we feel again here that active range of motion being explored. All of these big thigh muscles stabilizing and stretching. Now if you want to take this down further, You can experiment with it. As long as the heel of the bent knee leg stays down, that's wonderful. All the way down in a skandasana, definitely lift the toes. You can use props here. What you would do is take a block and sit it under your sit bones. I'm not gonna reach that right now. So really, with the toes pointed up of this extended leg, feel this active draw on that inner thigh. And what I like to do is give myself a little twist here, one arm overhead. My tricep is hooked on this knee, creating traction to bring my chest forward and twisting the same direction as that straightened leg. You can also take a bind here. So keeping the tricep in contact with the inside of the knee, wrap the forearm behind the ankle, so my palm is facing out now, and this top arm comes around behind, linking the hands together, and now really using traction to draw that top shoulder back and looking up and back over that shoulder. Now when we transition to the other side, I like to keep my hips really, really low. Send my hands out in front as counterbalance, and I'm going to start by rolling these toes down and shifting my hips over. I always feel like a ninja when I do that. So now the right leg, the toes are pointed up. Again, I'm drawing this leg in towards my hip socket here, and that really deepens the stretch on the inside of the thigh. Left hand just to the ground or mat in front of you, that right arm reaching up and overhead. And taking the bind again. I encourage you, if you try a version with a bind on one side, to always try it on the other side as well, to avoid imbalances. Now if you're not all the way down here in this low skandasana, you can just keep hinging back and forth, a little bit more repetitions, and I'm going to take it back and forth a couple times, staying really low here. Excellent move for hip mobility and strength. Okay, now place your hands to the mat in front of you, and let's work our way into this forward fold. Now I think pretty confidently our thighs, our quads, our hamstrings, hips are warmed up. So we'll start to settle our way into some of these deeper stretches here. So forward fold, again, feet parallel to the short edge of the mat, toes are pointing towards the long edge of the mat. Here you could also use a block. Tendency is going to be to press into the outside edge of the feet and almost roll your ankles to the outside. Try to keep even weight distributed through the inside edge of your foot and the outside edge. Keep your spine straight here. So in order to do this, you might need to lift up higher onto your block. Okay? Now poses like this require a lot of dedication and commitment to increasing your range of motion here. If you throw them into your practice regularly, I promise you'll see an increase in your range of motion, but it does not happen right away. It doesn't happen in one practice. So we'll hold our fold here, acknowledging maybe the urge that you have to adjust your shirt or fix your hair. We'll start to reframe our thinking, so we're just acknowledging those desires. If you feel that your hamstrings and inner thighs are okay, maybe you want to take this down a little bit lower. What you would do is move your block to the side. You could put hands to the mat. As long as we keep our back straight here. So think about hinging from the waist instead of rounding the back. So I'm almost thinking about tipping my tailbone up more and bringing my chest down to the mat. And for some of us, this will be okay to lower the chest down even further. You could take your hands to the outside edge of your feet. And someday, one day, your head might make it down to the mat. Check in that your knees are not locked here. Micro bend in the knees. And now once I feel like I've found my limit, again, maybe some of us are up here, which is totally beautiful and amazing. Take that little bend and wiggle in the knees, wiggling the hips back and forth again. So this is, like I said, very similar to when you're in downward facing dog and you pedal your feet, kind of the same concept. So we'll pedal, pedal, bending one knee, straightening the other. And then we'll find our stillness again and see if anything feels different. Maybe we notice we can get a little bit more range of motion here. Now something else to experiment with in this forward fold, and when we get into other stretches specifically for the hamstring, I've mentioned that the engagement of the thighs and the hamstrings is important when you're trying to increase the flexibility. So think about that notion again of lifting your kneecap into your hip socket to engage your quad and squeezing your glutes here in this forward fold. So those muscles are really active and engaged. It sounds counterintuitive, but some of us might find that that can actually increase our flexibility here. Okay, now place your hands back down to the ground or to the mat and just heel toe your feet in together. You can step them in, take the knees together, and either forward fold or I'm going to take this all the way down to like our kind of ball egg pose here, but some sort of counter pose that's the opposite of having your legs really wide and folding forward. So we want to take the legs together just to counter pose that. So give your knees a little squeeze here. Okay, now let's all come down to a tabletop. If you have 2 blocks here, this is great. If not, just 1 block is okay. Have that block at the top of the mat to start out with. So tabletop, I'm going to take tented fingers here. So instead of my hand being flat on the mat, I'm going to go up on my fingertips so the palm of my hand is lifted up. That's going to give me more clearance here for what I'm about to do. Right leg goes straight up behind you. Draw that right knee in, bending the knee, rounding the back, and try to step that right foot through to the top of the mat without using momentum. The goal is to try. It's taken me years to get to the point where I can step my foot through like that without having to swing it. So don't feel discouraged if you're having to use momentum. Also now here, scoot the foot a little bit forward so that your knee is stacked directly above the ankle. We want to have our block, let's see, let's actually have it on the left side, so underneath the left hand. Tuck the left toes down, press into the left foot and lift the hips, straighten the left leg, lift the right arm up overhead. Think about keeping the right knee stacked above the right ankle, so you might have to shift that right knee forward a tiny bit. So our hips are high and lifted here, but by actively pressing through the back heel, we can help to lengthen the thigh of the left leg, the quad, and the hip flexor. And now we'll lower that left knee down. Place the top of that left foot down on the mat. Lower the right hand. Draw your block back to about halfway between your heel and your knee. And here's if you have 2 blocks, you would want to put another one underneath your right hand, but I'll just show you with the 1 block. Lift your chest nice and high, so stacking your block if you need, and now take your hips back towards the opposite edge of the mat, straighten this front knee and tip these right toes up. Now start here with your chest high and lifted. Already here, some of us might feel, yep, that's a really intense hamstring stretch. Again, our goal is to have the back straight, and any amount of forward fold will come from hinging at the waist, not from rounding the back and curling the spine. A lot of people will think, wow, look how flexible I am. Got my head to touch my knee. But when you round the back, you take the hamstring out of the equation. So we're trying to focus on the hamstring a little bit right now. Actually, a lot, not just a little bit. Okay, so something else to note here. I notice myself doing this. The tendency will be to sway your hips over to the side of the knee that's resting on the ground. You could try to adjust this by changing your block to the other side, or just actively pulling your hips towards the side of the straight leg, and at the same time pulling this femur back into the hip socket. Okay, so what that does is, maybe I'll show you here, it keeps our pelvis neutral. Okay, so before adjusting, I'm leaned over to the left and my right leg has drawn forward, so my right hip has rolled forward. This gives the illusion of more flexibility. So drawing the right femur back, right hip point comes back, and now I'm pretty much neutral pelvis. Pelvis is squared to the front edge of the mat. And then from here, once we have our alignment all set, we can experiment with hinging from the waist, folding the chest down towards the shin. I am just covered in cat hair today, so this is really testing my mindfulness, and my urge to fidget is through the roof right now, off the charts. So this is half split Ardha Hanumanasana, named after Hanuman, who is a monkey god who hung out in the splits all the time. So this is half split, one of my go-to poses for my split practice. Splits are just as much about hamstring flexibility as they are about hip flexor flexibility. So the flip side of this will be to place the front foot down, bend that knee forward again, bringing those hips down and forward. Now, there's almost like two schools of thought about this hip flexor mobility here. A lot of yogis, you'll see, really bring those hips down and forward. We get this arch in our back, and it looks really aesthetically pleasing. Like, this is a really beautiful pose. It's great for pictures, but this big arch in our lower back, first of all, can cause injury over time, and second of all, it's stealing from the hip flexor. So to appear to have more flexibility, my lower back is compensating here. If I take that lower back out of the equation, think about scooping the tailbone forward towards this right heel. All of a sudden, I have no choice but to come way up here in keeping my back neutral. And what happens is my hip flexor then is the main focus of the stretch, and that's what we want. So you could even take this front foot back a little bit more. You have 90 degrees here, 90 degrees here. It's perfect. And think more about scooping the tailbone forward, not duck butt popping out behind you and this curve in the lower back. And experiment with it. Try the passive version here, where yes, we're balancing and stabilizing ourselves, but the left hip flexor is not really doing anything. And then all of a sudden scooping the tailbone forward, and then you feel that hip flexor and quad stretch. You can again have your blocks here to help you balance. I also particularly like to use the block to help me deepen this pose here. The block will go on the outside of the front knee, about, right underneath where my hip would be. Left arm comes up and over And now I'm folding to the side. I'll show you this angle. And what this does for me is it gets into a whole other component of the hip flexor that's a little bit more deep in my belly, like about above my hip bone point actually. And you can experiment with bringing the hips forward a little bit more, deepening that stretch. Hello, hip flexor. If you don't quite feel this hip flexor stretch that I'm talking about, please play around with it. Shift your hips forward, shift your tailbone back, tuck the tailbone forward, straight, wiggle that front foot forward a little bit more. It takes some fine tuning until you get that sweet spot where you can really tap into the hip flexor. So for me personally, it's walking my front foot forward a tiny bit more, sinking my hips down and forward, actively scooping the tailbone forward, and then taking this arm up and over to the right side. So now that you kind of have an idea for that, we'll take it back and forth between Ardha Hanumanasana, our half split, and Anjaneyasana. I might have that wrong. A low lunge. So what I'm doing here, notice I'm keeping my hand on my block for stability and just rocking the hips forward and back. The toes come up when you take it back to half split, still actively pulling the femur into the hip bone here, into that socket, and then taking it forward. So this combination of poses targets both of the muscle groups responsible for getting you into your splits, the hamstrings and the hip flexors. And now for good measure, we'll take it forward into our lunge. We'll keep the block here on the right side. We're gonna fire up this back hamstring here. Lift the back foot, reaching the left hand back. You might be needing a strap here, which is okay. If you need the strap, what you would do is place it under your foot before you lift it. Strap in your hand and then lifting. Be warned, this can oftentimes make a cramp in your back hamstring because it is pretty intense. So once you have connection between either your left hand and foot or the strap, start to pull that left heel all the way in towards your bum and say hello to that quad, the quadricep stretching nice here. Keep yourself nice and upright. If we hinge forward, quad is taken out of the equation, so keep yourself upright and really think about actively pressing your left knee down at the same time pulling this back heel up and in. You can even pull your belly in here. Challenge your balance if you want, lifting right arm overhead, lifting your gaze. All sorts of ways we can modify this. Now release that foot nice and slow. And we're going to switch to the other side. So back to our tabletop. Tented fingers here. Left leg goes straight out behind. Then draw the left knee in, rounding the back. Step the left foot through to the top of the mat. Nice and controlled. Bring those hips down and forward. Right hand to the block inside of your left foot. Tuck the right toes. Press into that foot and lift the left arm, twisting to the left. Imagine lengthening all the way through the right heel. Our hips are lifted, but they're not lifted here. We still have a bend in the left knee. And now lower the left hand. We'll get our block ready. The right knee comes down. Our hips are shifted forward. Find that edge for you. And for good measure, I like to take this really deep bend here, a little bit of back mobility, lower back mobility. But for years and years in my practice, that was all that I did. And I ended up with a hypermobile lower back with no support, no strength. And so of course I had an injured back. So I take it just a little bit for old time's sake. And then I'll try to find more of the anatomical, gentle yet targeted hip flexor stretch here. And then rocking the hips back, find your half split, Ardha Hanumanasana. Shift your hips a little bit to the left, draw the left femur back and in, rolling those left toes up. Hinge at the waist, only as much as you can while keeping your back straight. And now you know the alignment of the poses here, so you can play around with it, rocking forward, rocking back, or just maintaining here. My left side is my left flexible side. So I like to not be as static here. I find that a little bit more movement is, again, encouraging blood flow to these big muscles. I'm keeping them active while stretching them, which is safer than passively stretching. So I'm going to move back and forth several times. And then I'll take this top arm overhead. The overwhelming majority of prep work that I do for the splits is not actually doing the splits. Just like in my handstand practice, I don't practice handstands by doing handstands. We address the main muscle groups involved in the pose that we're hoping for, and that way we can avoid injury and overuse, strains. Okay, take this left knee forward again. Find your more or less 90 degrees, and we'll take this right foot up, bringing that right heel in. I hope that I can accurately explain these concepts to you, the difference between passively stretching and actively stretching. First of all, here, if your right arm, your top arm here is totally lax, that's a pretty passive stretch. So I'm actively pulling my right foot in, at the same time, mind-muscle connection here, pressing my right knee down, which I know it doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense since we have our right knee in contact with the mat, but you can be pretty passive with this right knee as well. So play around with that on your own. See if you can notice a difference. Okay. Now, one last juicy stretch that is my personal favorite for lower body mobility. We'll sit down on the mat, a wide-legged forward fold. So if you need, you could have a pillow under your butt here. I don't really recommend the block, because what will happen if you prop up your bum with a block here, your knees will almost have no choice but to tend towards hyperextending. If you have really, really, really tight hamstrings, you could use a block, but I think a pillow would be a little bit more forgiving here. And as with all of our other stretches here, our goal is to have our back straight and upright. To get myself into this position, I use my hands to grip inside of my knees, and I kind of rock the knee out from under my sit bones, and I'm shifting my pelvis forward, bringing my chest forward. Feet are pointing up. Sometimes the tendency will to be roll the feet backwards or inwards, depending on your hip anatomy. So just feet pointing straight up, and that helps keep my legs active. Again, that idea of lifting the kneecap into the hip socket. I don't know if you guys can see in the video, it might be too zoomed out, but when I lift my knees towards my hips, my whole thighs and quads are active here. So much so that I can pick my heels up off of the mat. So you can play around with that. And then once you feel more or less comfortable, might be a little bit uncomfortable, but again, please not painful. Then we start to walk the hands out in front of us, bringing the chest towards the ground. You can have block here. This will be as far as some of us go today. I promise you, it is more important to have proper form rather than depth in these poses. The depth will come with time, but if you ignore the proper form, you could injure yourself, or you might just never actually increase your flexibility. So again, toes pointing up, back is straight. Starting out on the block here, my thighs are active, my glutes are even active here, firing up all of these big muscles in the legs. And then I'm going to walk my hands out. I broke my own rule here. Instead of moving the cat hair away on my mat, I just blew it away. So I'm not being very good with being mindful, I guess. I'm letting myself get distracted by these silly things, just like cat hair on my yoga mat, because it's distracting me from the sensations in my inner thighs right now. I just want to reiterate again, please try not to round your back and walk your hands out and think, oh yes, look how flexible I'm getting. I much prefer, and it's much safer for you, to keep your back nice and straight and hinge from the waist any amount that you can. Over time, I promise. When I started practicing this little sequence regularly, I was blown away by how quickly my range of motion improved here. I promise this one will come with time. Okay, so now pressing into your hands, bring yourself upright again. Use your hands to draw your knees up and in. Zip those thighs together, knees together, and lie down on your back now. We'll just take this right into a happy baby since we're already pretty cooled down and I'm running short on time. So knees into your chest, take your hands to the outside of the feet, and then draw the feet and knees wide. Think about bringing your knees to the mat on either side of your rib cage. And then find your way into Shavasana. Hopefully in this class we've mentally prepared ourselves enough to lie in a Shavasana without wiggling or adjusting. We can feel those sensations and the desire to adjust and change, but just acknowledge them for what they are. If you have pain, please adjust to avoid the pain. But if you just feel like, ooh, I need to change the way my shirt is sitting on it's tugging on my hip, that's not causing you pain right now. And so those are the sensations that we try to resist. So totally relax, unclench your teeth, soften your jaw. We observe Shavasana with the eyes closed. Feel the arches of your feet are soft. Your feet will splay out to the sides. Even feel that the palms of your hands are soft and your fingers will gently curl in towards one another. With every breath, can you soften your shoulders into the mat a little bit more? No control over your breath. I want you to observe your Shavasana for a few more minutes. I need to wrap up so I don't get kicked off of the live recording, but while you're resting in your Shavasana, I'll finish this reading for you. And then when you are done with your Shavasana, just mindfully press your way back up to a comfortable seat and sit in a few moments of silence. So to finish, Pema Chodron says, refraining, not habitually acting out impulsively, has something to do with giving up the entertainment mentality. Through refraining, we see that there's something between the arising of the craving or the aggression of the loneliness or whatever it might be, and whatever action we take as a result. There's something there in us that we don't want to experience, and we never do experience because we're so quick to act. The practice of mindfulness and refraining is a way to get in touch with basic groundlessness by noticing how we try to avoid it. I love that one. So in simple acts, as in our yoga class, we want to fix our shirt or readjust the waist of our pants. What is it that causes us to act out in those ways instead of just sitting with the feeling of like, well, my shirt looks a little bit messed up, but that's okay. We allow ourselves to be distracted by little insignificant feelings like that. And what are they drawing us away from at the end of the day? We're not giving ourselves a chance to just sit with these feelings of uncomfortable things. So we practice this. And I hope that you can take these concepts into your day-to-day life. Thank you for joining me.